The conference room on the 42nd floor is all glass and steel, suspended over the city like a celestial throne. Marcus Holloway stands motionless like a marble statue, wearing a $12,000 Italian suit that falls perfectly over his broad shoulders. He's 53 years old, gray hair slicked back, piercing blue eyes that seem to calculate the value of a soul in fractions of a second. His hands are crossed behind his back, military posture, as he gazes through the window at the smaller buildings that bow before his empire. Around him, 8 executives remain in absolute silence, holding tablets and reports, breathing low, as if the very air belongs to him. The door opens. Sarah Mitchell enters, 36 years old, brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a gray blazer that has seen better days and black shoes worn at the tips. She carries a worn briefcase under her arm and there are dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes. She walks to the center of the room, notices the heavy silence, feels the pitying looks from colleagues. Marcus doesn't turn around. He continues looking out the window as if she doesn't exist. Then he speaks, voice deep and controlled, each word falling like a judicial sentence. He says he's made a decision about the data analysis department restructuring. Says the company needs maximum efficiency, people who understand what total commitment means, professionals who put the company above everything. He finally turns, and his blue eyes fix on her with the coldness of a surgeon about to make a cut. He says that Sarah Mitchell is fired, effective immediately, that human resources will process her exit, that she has 30 minutes to clear her desk and turn in her badge. The silence in the room is sepulchral. Sarah doesn't move. She just looks at him with an expression Marcus can't decipher. It's not fear. It's not surprise. It's something deeper, something that seems loaded with knowledge he doesn't possess. The seconds pass like hours. Then Sarah takes a step forward, her voice low but firm as stone. She says he's going to regret this decision, not because she'll sue him, not because she'll cause trouble, but because in exactly 17 days, when the system collapses and he discovers what she was doing for the last 6 weeks, he'll understand the true cost of arrogance. She says he's always known how to destroy, but never learned how to see. Then she turns and leaves the room, leaving the briefcase on the table, without looking back. Marcus stands paralyzed. Something in her voice, in the absolute certainty of that statement, pierces his armor of power. He feels, for the first time in years, a strange cold climbing up his spine. But he quickly regains composure, orders everyone back to work, and dismisses that moment as one dismisses an irritating insect. Still, his hands tremble slightly when he sits at the head of the table. Marcus Holloway wakes every morning at 4:45, exactly. Not from natural discipline, but because sleep is a territory he doesn't control, and everything that can't be controlled must be eliminated. He walks to the window of his 3-story penthouse, looks at the still dark city, and counts the buildings that belong to him. 7 skyscrapers. 16 companies. $340 million in liquid assets. He repeats these numbers mentally like a mantra, as if they could fill the void that grows inside him each year. His routine is surgical. 50 minutes of military exercises with a personal trainer who can't look him in the eyes. Shower of exactly 12 minutes. Pure black coffee, no sugar, no milk, accompanied by financial reports while he chews tasteless toast. He doesn't like food. Food is fuel, pleasure is waste. At 6:30, his driver is already waiting. In the car, he doesn't speak, just types on 3 tablets simultaneously, coordinating acquisitions, dismantling competitors, calculating profits. At the office, he's a destructive force of nature. Meetings where people cry. Calls where he crushes careers with 3 sentences. Decisions that affect thousands of lives made with the same coldness with which one chooses which pen to use. He's fired managers in front of their teams. Cancelled years-long projects in 30 seconds. Demoted executives he considered weak. Emotional fragility, for Marcus, is a contagious disease that needs to be extirpated. His family is an abstract concept. Ex-wife who lives in London and barely responds to his emails. 2 adult children who call him father only on legal documents. He paid for the best schools, the best universities, the best apartments. Gave money, never time. Offered power, never presence. They grew up hating him with the same intensity with which he considers them weak for needing affection. At night, Marcus drinks 40-year-old Scotch whiskey, sitting alone in the dark mahogany library, surrounded by books he's never read, contemplating paintings by famous artists that don't move him. He has no friends. He has associates, business partners, people who fear and respect him. But friends, those who know his soul, don't exist because he himself locked his soul in a vault decades ago and threw the key into an abyss. He built all this after growing up poor, son of an alcoholic factory worker who beat him with a belt every time he got a bad grade. He built this empire on the ruins of his own humanity, erected these buildings on the rubble of who he could have been. And now, at 53, sitting at the absolute top of the corporate world, Marcus Holloway is completely empty, completely alone, completely dead inside. But he doesn't admit this even to himself. Instead, he increases control, intensifies cruelty, multiplies power, in a desperate attempt to fill with numbers what he can no longer feel with his heart. Sarah Mitchell wakes at 5 in the morning not because she wants to, but because she has to. Her alarm rings on the cracked phone she keeps working with tape and prayers. She slowly gets up from the squeaking mattress, in a 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs where the paint on the walls is peeling and the heater only works half the time. She walks to the next room and watches her 2 children sleeping. Emma, 9 years old, hugging a patched teddy bear. Daniel, 6 years old, breathing softly under the blanket Sarah sewed from old clothes. She prepares breakfast with what's in the nearly empty refrigerator. Pancakes made with the last cup of flour. Milk divided into 2 small mugs. She doesn't eat, says she's not hungry, but the truth is the money needs to last until the end of the month and the children come first, always. She wakes them with kisses on the forehead, helps Emma choose her clothes for school, ties Daniel's shoes, combs their hair while telling stories about astronauts and scientists who changed the world. Sarah's past is of a brilliant computer engineering student who won a full scholarship to MIT. She was in her 3rd year when she met Tom, an architecture student with an easy smile and big dreams. They married young, in love, naive. She got pregnant with Emma and paused her studies to be a mother. Tom promised it would be temporary, that she would return, that he would support the family. Then Daniel came, and the plans were postponed again. Then Tom met another woman at work, and on a rainy Tuesday he simply walked out the door saying he wasn't born to be a father, that he needed to live his life, that it wasn't personal. Sarah was left alone at 27 with 2 small children, no completed degree, no family nearby because her parents died in a car accident when she was 22. She worked as a waitress, as a cleaner, as a telemarketing attendant. At night, after the children slept, she studied programming online, devoured free courses, built complex codes in the early morning under the dim light of a broken lamp. She had an extraordinary natural talent for algorithms, for visualizing patterns in massive data, for creating systems that seemed to have intelligence of their own. 5 years ago, she got a junior job at Marcus's company as a data analyst. She arrived earlier, left later when she could pay for a babysitter, worked weekends when the children were with the elderly neighbor who helped out of compassion. No one at the company knew she was basically self-taught. No one knew she solved in 2 hours problems that the team took weeks on. No one noticed because she was invisible, just another low-level employee, a tired single mother with simple clothes and no time for corporate politics. But Sarah was doing something extraordinary. For the last 6 weeks, she had discovered a critical flaw in the company's security system, a vulnerability so deep it could bring down the entire technological infrastructure in a matter of days. She was building a correction protocol alone, working 16 hours a day, sacrificing sleep, sacrificing time with her children, because she knew the entire company, thousands of jobs, billions of dollars, depended on it. She had tried to report to superiors 3 times. She was ignored. They said she was worrying too much, that she didn't understand the big picture, that she should focus on her basic tasks, that more experienced engineers would take care of it if it were real. And now, fired humiliatingly, carrying her small cardboard box with a photo of her children and a cracked mug, Sarah Mitchell walks to the bus stop crying silently. She doesn't cry for losing the job, but for the unfinished project left behind. She knows exactly what's going to happen. She knows that in 17 days, when the system goes into total collapse, lives will be destroyed. And she couldn't prevent it because no one wanted to listen. No one can see beyond the tired single mother. No one sees the brilliant mind hidden under the social invisibility of female poverty. 3 days after the firing, Marcus is reviewing financial reports when his technology director, James, enters the office with a tense expression. James says they found strange files on the server, complex codes that no one authorized, security protocols that no one on the team recognizes. Marcus asks who did this. James hesitates, then says the name, Sarah Mitchell. The woman he just fired. Marcus feels a wave of anger rising in his chest. He always knew she was problematic. Now there's proof, she was doing unauthorized work, possibly sabotage, maybe selling information. He orders James to find out everything, to track every line of code, to prepare documentation for possible criminal prosecution. 2 hours later, Marcus takes his car and drives personally to Sarah's address in HR files. He wants to confront her directly, wants to see fear in her eyes when he threatens with lawsuit, prison, complete destruction. It's a poor area of the city he's never visited, worn buildings with peeling facades, children playing in narrow streets, women carrying grocery bags. He feels instinctive disgust, speeds through the streets as if poverty were contagious. He climbs the creaky stairs to the 3rd floor, bangs on the door forcefully. Sarah opens, wearing an old sweatshirt and pajama pants, wet hair as if she just got out of the shower. She sees him and her face shows no surprise, just a deep and tired sadness. Marcus enters uninvited, looks around the tiny apartment with old furniture, scattered toys, children's drawings stuck on the refrigerator. He starts speaking loudly, accusing her of violating protocols, of creating unauthorized codes, of possibly committing crimes. She lets him talk, waits in silence, then walks to the small kitchen table and grabs an old laptop with a cracked screen. She opens a file and turns the screen toward him. She explains with a calm, didactic voice, as if teaching a child. Says she discovered a level 5 security vulnerability, something sophisticated hackers could exploit to bring down critical systems, access customer data, destroy backups. Says she tried to report 3 times and was ignored. Says she then worked alone to create a correction protocol because thousands of jobs depended on it, because she has principles, because doing the right thing matters more than corporate hierarchy. Marcus looks at the screen, sees complex codes he doesn't fully understand, but recognizes the sophistication. She continues explaining, pointing to specific lines, showing attack simulations, demonstrating how her correction would protect the system. Her voice is firm, technical, absolutely confident. And then she says something that paralyzes him. She says the vulnerability was accidentally created by the elite engineering team he paid millions to hire, those men from prestigious universities he considers geniuses. She says they made basic architecture mistakes because they were more concerned with impressing investors than doing the work correctly. She says she noticed this in 3 weeks, but no one wanted to listen because she's just a junior analyst, because her voice has no weight, because in his world, intelligence only counts when it comes packaged in the right wrapper. Marcus feels something uncomfortable forming in his stomach. It's not just the technical understanding of the problem. It's the way she said it. Without anger, without resentment, just a factual statement of how the system works, of how he works. She exposed something he spent decades avoiding facing, his own systematic blind spot, his inability to see value beyond the superficial metrics he uses to evaluate people. He tries to regain composure, says he'll have the team analyze her work, that if it's legitimate maybe he'll reconsider the firing. She slowly closes the laptop and looks directly into his eyes. She says she doesn't want the job back, not like that, not as a favor, not as a concession from a benevolent king. She says she deserved to be heard from the beginning, that she deserved professional respect regardless of her position, that he confused power with wisdom and is now reaping the consequences of his own arrogance. Marcus leaves her apartment feeling something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine doubt about himself. He gets in the car, looks in the rearview mirror and sees a man he doesn't completely recognize. For a brief moment, he wonders who he really became. Then he pushes that thought away, starts the engine, and speeds back to his world of absolute certainties. But something was planted, a tiny seed of questioning that will begin to grow in the shadows of his consciousness. The next morning, Marcus wakes to a flood of notifications. His phone vibrates incessantly, emails pile up by the thousands, text messages explode like digital fireworks. He grabs the phone still in bed and sees headlines that make his blood freeze. Billionaire fires single mother who discovered critical company flaw. Cruel investor ignores warnings from brilliant engineer and puts business at risk. Marcus Holloway, the corporate tyrant who doesn't recognize female talent. Someone leaked the story. Not just leaked, but told it with devastating details. The business press is blasting his decision. Tech portals are analyzing how companies systematically ignore low-level employees. Social media is on fire with viral threads about Sarah Mitchell, the single mother who tried to save the company and was fired for it. Photos of her are shared millions of times, images where she looks tired but determined, where she holds her children with a protective gaze. Journalists discovered her complete story. The incomplete MIT. The husband who abandoned her. The years struggling alone. The brilliant work she did without recognition. Anonymous company employees started giving interviews confirming she was extraordinarily talented, that she was always underestimated, that Marcus's corporate culture was toxic and destructive. A former manager tells how he saw Marcus humiliate Sarah in a meeting, calling her report amateurism from someone who doesn't understand real business. Marcus arrives at the office and finds protests in front of the building. 50 people with signs defending Sarah, demanding justice, calling for an end to the culture of corporate abuse. Reporters surround his car, cameras film his tense face, microphones are pushed against the window as they ask aggressive questions. He enters through the garage, goes straight up to his floor, but feels the stares of employees in the elevator, silences loaded with judgment, respect transformed into silent contempt. In the emergency meeting with public relations, they present the numbers. Trending topics on 3 different platforms. Loss of 2 percentage points in stock value in 16 hours. Major clients calling worried about the company's reputation. Potential investors canceling meetings. The damage isn't just moral, it's financial, concrete, measurable in the only language Marcus always understood perfectly. The PR team suggests a public statement apologizing, an offer of rehiring with generous compensation, an image campaign showing Marcus as a leader who recognizes mistakes. He listens to everything with a clenched jaw, hands gripping the leather chair arms. He hates every word because they all confirm he was wrong, that she was right, that the whole world can now see his flaws exposed like open wounds. The contrast is everywhere. On social media, memes emerge comparing his billionaire arrogance with her silent dignity. Viral videos tell her story as a modern fairy tale, the invisible heroine who tried to do the right thing. He became the perfect villain, the symbol of everything wrong with corporate capitalism, while Sarah Mitchell is portrayed as a martyr, as a symbol of all talented workers who are crushed by gigantic egos and blind hierarchies. Marcus watches all this from his silent office on the 42nd floor, feeling for the first time in decades what it's like to be on the wrong side of the public narrative. He always controlled his image with surgical precision. Now he's watching that control crumble in real time, viral, unstoppable, like an avalanche gaining speed as it descends the mountain. And deep in his hardened soul, a voice he doesn't recognize whispers something disturbing: what if they're right about you? 5 days after the public explosion, Marcus can't take it anymore. He needs to confront Sarah again, needs to make her understand his perspective, needs to somehow regain control of the narrative. He drives to her apartment, this time at night, when the streets are emptier and no one can photograph him. Sarah opens the door and sighs when she sees him. She's wearing an old apron, hands dirty with cake batter, hair pinned up. From inside the apartment comes the sound of children's laughter, a television on a cartoon. She doesn't invite him in, just crosses her arms and waits at the doorstep. Marcus begins his carefully prepared defense. He says he manages a complex business with thousands of variables, that difficult decisions need to be made every day, that he can't personally know each employee and their circumstances. Says he built that company from scratch with brutal work, that he sacrificed everything to create that empire, that he deserves respect for his achievements. Says he may have been too harsh, but that harshness is necessary in a competitive environment, that sentimentality destroys businesses, that the corporate world is no place for the weak. Sarah listens in silence, face expressionless. When he finishes, she lets the silence hang for long seconds. Then she speaks, voice low but each word perfectly articulated, loaded with a truth so devastating that he feels it like punches to the stomach. She says he's wrong about everything. Says he didn't build anything, he just accumulated. Says he confuses wealth with value, power with purpose, control with competence. She says he became so obsessed with winning that he forgot what winning is for. Says he destroys people because he's afraid of being insignificant, that he humiliates because he needs to feel big, that he controls everything because inside he's completely lost. She says true weakness isn't feeling, it's being so afraid of feeling that you build fortresses of cruelty around your heart. Says he's not tough, he's broken. Not strong, he's terrified. Not powerful, he's pathetic. A man who has everything and has nothing, who conquered the world but completely lost his own soul. She says the saddest thing isn't that he fired her, it's that he didn't even know who he was firing, because he never really looks at people. He only sees functions, numbers, pieces he can move or discard. She says he's a billionaire but he's the poorest man she's ever met, because real wealth is love, connection, purpose, compassion, things he sold so long ago he doesn't even remember what it was like to have them. She says her children sleep every night feeling loved, protected, valued, even living in this small apartment with old furniture. She asks if his children can say the same. Asks if anyone in the world would stand by him if the money disappeared. Asks if he's ever felt, just once in his adult life, true human connection that wasn't conditioned on the power he wields. And then Sarah says the sentence that completely destroys Marcus. She looks directly into his eyes and says, "You spent your whole life trying to prove you're worth something, but the only thing you proved is that you don't know what real value means. And that, Mr. Holloway, is the saddest tragedy I've ever witnessed." She goes inside and gently closes the door, leaving him alone in the dark hallway with flickering lights. Marcus stands paralyzed. He feels something cracking inside his chest, as if a giant dam he built over decades is developing its first fissure. He walks to the car like an automaton, sits on the cold leather seat, and for the first time in 32 years, Marcus Holloway cries. Not discreet tears, but deep sobs that shake his entire body, as if decades of repressed pain finally found an exit. He cries for the man he could have been. For the children who don't know his heart because he buried it so long ago. For the wife who loved him once and gave up because loving a statue is impossible. For all the people he destroyed in the obsessive climb for power that now reveals itself completely empty. He cries because Sarah Mitchell, a single mother living in poverty, just showed him something all his money and power could never hide. He is a man profoundly, irredeemably lost. Sarah Mitchell was born into a modest family in a small town in the interior. Her father was a mechanic, hands always dirty with grease, easy smile and infinite patience. Her mother was an elementary school teacher, a sweet woman who recited poetry while preparing dinner. Sarah was an only child, and her parents poured all the love in the world into that curious child who took apart toys to understand how they worked. At 7 years old, Sarah found the old computer her father fixed and brought home. She spent hours exploring basic programs, learning logic on her own, creating simple codes that made drawings appear on the screen. Her father noticed the talent, started bringing programming books from libraries, tech magazines he found in used bookstores. Her mother encouraged her, saying women could be scientists, engineers, that the brain has no gender. In high school, Sarah was the best student in math and physics, but also loved literature and history. She wasn't just technically intelligent, she was curious about the world, about people, about why things are the way they are. She won programming competitions, but also wrote poetry in the school newspaper. She was balanced, complete, brilliantly human. The scholarship to MIT was a dream come true. Her parents cried with pride when she opened the acceptance letter. They didn't have money to help with extra expenses, but she got part-time jobs, studied all night, maintained perfect grades. In her second year, she met Tom at a party. He was handsome, charming, said all the right words. He made her feel seen, special, loved in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving home. They started dating. Tom had great personality but little substance, though Sarah didn't see that then. He talked about a future together, about building an extraordinary life, about how they would be partners in everything. When Sarah got accidentally pregnant in her third year, Tom said they would get married, that he would take responsibility, that she didn't need to be afraid. The wedding was simple in a small chapel. Sarah's parents traveled 16 hours by bus to be there, brought homemade cake and flowers from the garden. They were worried but supported their daughter because they always supported everything she decided. Sarah paused college, saying she would return soon, that it was just a temporary break. Emma was born perfect, tiny, crying loudly, and Sarah felt love she didn't know was possible. She took care of the baby with absolute dedication while Tom worked at an architecture firm. He started coming home late, complaining about being tired, saying he needed space. Sarah tried to understand, tried to be patient, tried to make everything work. Daniel was born 3 years later. Tom was even more distant. He went out on weekends saying it was work. Sarah found messages on his phone, obvious signs of infidelity, but she had 2 small children and was completely financially dependent on him. She felt trapped, scared, lost. When Tom finally left, Sarah panicked. Without a completed degree, without recent experience, with 2 small children, she found herself swimming in an ocean not knowing where the shore was. She worked 3 jobs simultaneously for a year. Waitress during the day, cleaner at night, typist at dawn. She slept 3 hours a night, nursed Daniel during breaks, helped Emma with homework during work pauses. Then came the tragedy that changed everything. Her parents were driving to visit her, bringing birthday presents for Emma, when a truck lost control on the wet road. The accident was instantaneous. They didn't suffer, the paramedic said, trying to be kind. Sarah received the news by phone while changing Daniel's diapers. She collapsed on the floor holding the baby, Emma crying without understanding, and Sarah felt the world had ended. At the funeral with closed caskets, Sarah held her children and promised her dead parents she would survive, that their grandchildren would have a good life, that their sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. She promised she would resume her studies somehow, that she would use the talent they nurtured, that she would be the woman they believed she could be. And she kept her promise. In the early mornings after triple shifts, with burning eyes from exhaustion, Sarah studied programming through free online courses. She devoured tutorials, practiced algorithms, built personal projects no one would ever see. Her brain was rusty from years without use, but gradually the ability returned, like a muscle remembering old movement. She built an impressive portfolio with fictional but technically sophisticated projects. She applied for hundreds of positions. Was repeatedly rejected, always the same unspoken reason: gap in resume, lack of formal degree, profile that didn't fit. But she persisted because giving up meant betraying her parents' memory, betraying her children's future, betraying herself. When she finally got the junior position at Marcus's company, she cried with relief. It wasn't MIT, it wasn't what she'd dreamed of, but it was a beginning. It was an opportunity. It was a chance to prove her worth. She arrived earlier to learn systems, stayed late reviewing codes, absorbed knowledge like a sponge desperate for water. And she was extraordinary. Her work had rare elegance, efficiency that impressed, creativity that solved problems others considered impossible. But she was invisible in the corporate structure. Woman, single mother, without academic pedigree, without network of contacts, without skill for office politics. She didn't know how to play the necessary games to move up. She just worked, brilliantly, silently, hoping competence would speak for itself. For 5 years, Sarah sacrificed everything for that job. Missed her children's school recitals for urgent meetings. Cancelled birthdays because projects had deadlines. Ate cold ramen at her desk while others dined at expensive restaurants. She did all this not from blind ambition, but because she believed hard work and talent would be recognized, that eventually the system would be fair, that doing the right thing mattered. When she discovered the critical vulnerability in the system, Sarah worked 16 hours a day to fix it. She knew every line of that code, understood every connection in that architecture. She saw exactly how hackers could exploit the flaw, imagined the millions of dollars in damage, the thousands of lost jobs, the destroyed families. She couldn't let that happen, not when she had the knowledge to prevent it. But no one listened. Her superiors ignored her 3 times. They said she was worrying too much, that she didn't understand the big picture, that she should focus on her simple tasks. She felt the frustration of being invisible elevated to the extreme, of having critical knowledge but powerless voice, of being treated like a child when she was the only adult in the room. And then came the firing. Marcus Holloway fired her without ever really seeing her, without knowing who she was, what she had done, what she was saving. For him, she was a dispensable number in a cost-cutting spreadsheet. For her, it was devastating confirmation of something she always feared, that in his world, people like her simply don't matter. Sarah Mitchell carried her cardboard box out of that glass and steel building feeling the weight of all accumulated injustices. But she also felt something more, determination burning like an ember. She knew her worth even if the world didn't recognize it. She knew she was right even if no one listened. And she knew that soon, the truth would reveal itself in a way not even Marcus Holloway could ignore. After that night in the apartment hallway, Marcus doesn't go home. He drives aimlessly through the city, crossing neighborhoods he's never visited, seeing people he's never noticed. At 3 a.m, he parks in front of the house where he grew up, now abandoned and in ruins in the old industrial district. He gets out of the car and stands looking at that decaying structure, broken windows, door torn off, weeds growing in the concrete cracks. He remembers his father coming home drunk every night, the smell of cheap whiskey mixed with manual labor sweat. Remembers the beatings with a leather belt, the screams saying he was stupid, useless, that he would never be anything. Remembers his mother watching everything in silence, dead eyes, victim who became accomplice through surrender. Remembers deciding, at 13, that he would never be weak again, never be a victim again, that he would build a fortress so big around himself that no one could hurt him ever again. And he built it. Every closed deal was a brick in that fortress. Every million earned was a layer of protection. Every person who feared him was confirmation he succeeded, that he escaped that place, that he became the absolute opposite of his failed and violent father. But as he looks at that house in ruins, Marcus realizes something terrifying. He didn't become the opposite of his father, he became a more sophisticated version of him. Same violence, just with an expensive suit. Same brutal control, just with corporate language. Same inability to love, just masked by financial success. Marcus sits on the dirty curb and collapses. Memories he locked away for decades explode like a broken dam. He remembers the first company he destroyed in a hostile takeover, how he celebrated the victory while 200 families lost jobs. Remembers the executive who had a nervous breakdown after Marcus publicly humiliated him, how he laughed about it with other investors during an expensive dinner. Remembers his own small children begging him to stay home on the weekend, how he said he had more important things than playing with children. He pulls out his phone and scrolls through hundreds of contacts. Partners. Lawyers. Consultants. Bankers. No real friends. No one who knows him beyond the public persona. No one who would care if he disappeared tomorrow beyond how it affected their investments. He built an empire but died socially. Conquered everything but completely lost his own humanity. Marcus thinks about Sarah saying her children sleep feeling loved. He tries to remember the last time he talked to his own children. 3 months ago? 6. He sent generous bank transfers, of course. Always provided materially. But when was the last time he asked how they really were? When was the last time he shared something real, vulnerable, human? He can't remember because maybe it never happened. He thinks about his ex-wife, Margaret, who genuinely loved him in the early years. How she tried to reach him thousands of times, how she begged for couples therapy, how she asked just for him to be present, really present. And how he ignored everything, saying she didn't understand the pressure he faced, that he was building a future for the family, that love is providing not feeling. Until one day she simply stopped trying and became a stranger living in the same house, until finally she left and he felt more relief than sadness because she was a constant reminder of his own emotional bankruptcy. Marcus remembers moments over the years when he had choices. The competent employee who asked to leave early for a family emergency and he denied it, saying professional commitment comes first. The young assistant he later learned had severe depression because of the insane pressure he put on her. The manager he fired for not hitting an impossible target without ever asking why, without discovering the man was caring for a wife with terminal cancer. He made decisions based purely on profit, efficiency, power, never considering the human cost. And now, sitting on that curb at 4 a.m. looking at his childhood home in ruins, Marcus realizes he is that house. Imposing facade hiding completely destroyed interior. Structure that looks solid but is rotten inside, about to collapse at the slightest strong wind. Sarah said he's the poorest man she's ever met. Marcus always thought poverty was lack of money. Now he understands that real poverty is lack of connection, of purpose, of love, of meaning. And by that measure, he's completely indigent, an emotional beggar asking for crumbs of validation through empty achievements. He cries until he has no more tears, until he feels completely empty, hollow, exhausted. When the sun starts to rise, Marcus is still sitting there, a 53-year-old man in a $12,000 suit worth absolutely nothing. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Holloway faces the naked and brutal truth about himself. He wasted decades building a golden prison and locked himself inside it. A week after that night, Marcus is in the office when James, the technology director, enters with a pale face holding a tablet with trembling hands. Marcus looks up and sees genuine panic in the man's eyes. James speaks with a strangled voice, saying the system has started showing critical failures, exactly as Sarah had predicted, and that the situation is much worse than they imagined. James explains they started a complete investigation of the code Sarah was writing before the firing. They discovered she wasn't just identifying vulnerability, she was building a solution so sophisticated the elite team took days just to understand what she did. She had predicted 17 different attack vectors, created multi-layer defense protocols, developed a system that automatically adapted to new threats. It was work of absolute genius, something that should take an entire team months to develop, and she did it alone in 6 weeks, working only in her spare time. Marcus feels cold in his spine. He asks what the extent of the problem is. James takes a deep breath and explains that without the corrections Sarah was implementing, the system will completely collapse in approximately 10 days. When that happens, the company's entire technological infrastructure will go down. Data from millions of customers exposed. Financial transactions interrupted. Backups compromised. The financial damage is estimated at $400 million in the first week, but could escalate to billions if not contained quickly. Marcus asks why the elite team didn't notice this before. James hesitates, then admits something humiliating. Says they reviewed all the work of the principal engineers and found basic architecture errors that any competent programmer would have avoided. The team was more concerned with using impressive technologies than building solid systems. They optimized for beautiful presentations to investors, not real security. And Sarah, working quietly at the junior level, was the only one who truly understood the structure deeply enough to see the flaws. Marcus asks if they can finish her work. James shakes his head. Says they're trying, but the codes she wrote are so complex and interconnected that without her explaining the logic, they're basically guessing. They've already tried implementing parts and caused 3 partial crashes. Each attempt makes the situation worse. They need her, not just the codes, but her mind, her deep understanding of the system. Marcus feels the devastating irony of the situation. He fired the only person who could save everything. He publicly humiliated her, destroyed her professionally, based on the arrogance of thinking he knew better, that she was dispensable, that his superficial judgment was more reliable than her technical knowledge. And now he's sitting in a luxury office watching the empire that took decades to build crumbling because he couldn't see value hidden beneath lack of corporate pedigree. James continues explaining more discoveries. They reviewed the records and found 3 detailed memos Sarah sent to upper managers warning about the vulnerability. All were ignored or dismissed with condescending responses saying she should focus on simpler tasks. One manager even wrote that a junior analyst shouldn't question the work of senior engineers with PhDs from Stanford. The institutional arrogance is documented in emails that now seemed like corporate death sentences. Marcus realizes it wasn't just him. It was the entire culture he created, the system he built where hierarchy matters more than competence, where appearance is worth more than substance, where corporate politics suffocates real merit. He built the company in his image, and that image is revealing itself fundamentally flawed in ways that can destroy everything. He also discovers that Sarah identified not just the security vulnerability, but 3 other operational efficiencies that would have saved $22 million per year. She presented these ideas in team meetings and was systematically ignored, her suggestions filed without serious analysis because they came from someone the organization had decided didn't deserve to be heard. Marcus takes Sarah's reports and reads them with growing attention. The technical writing is clear, elegant, sophisticated. She doesn't just identify problems, she explains root causes with deep analysis, proposes solutions with impressive detail, anticipates objections with solid counterarguments. It's world-class work hidden in the body of a tired single mother no one considered worthy of real attention. He closes his eyes and sees Sarah standing in that conference room 2 weeks ago, saying he would learn the cost of arrogance in 17 days. She knew exactly what would happen. She tried to warn him until the last moment. And he fired her anyway because his gigantic ego wouldn't allow a junior employee to challenge him, because admitting she could be right meant admitting he could be wrong, and that was impossible for a man who built his entire identity on absolute certainty and total control. Marcus looks out the window at the city he always felt belonged to him. But now he realizes he doesn't really own anything. Buildings, money, company, everything can disappear. And without all that, who is he? An empty man who destroyed relationships in pursuit of power that now reveals itself as fragile illusion. And the woman he discarded like garbage was the only real, valuable, essential thing he had, and he threw her away with the disdain of a king blinded by privilege. It's Saturday night when Marcus drives again to Sarah's apartment. This time he doesn't go as a powerful investor making a concession. He goes as a broken man seeking redemption he doesn't deserve. He climbs the stairs slowly, each step weighing like a mountain. He knocks on the door softly, almost hoping she won't answer, almost relieved if that happens because he doesn't know how to begin what he needs to say. Sarah opens the door wearing simple house clothes, hair loose, no makeup. She looks at him with profound exhaustion, not from sleep but from the whole situation, from having to deal with consequences of decisions she didn't make. Behind her, Marcus sees the apartment. Emma is sitting at the small table drawing. Daniel plays on the floor with old toy cars. An old television broadcasts a children's movie at low volume. It's a scene of domestic normalcy so distant from his world it seems like another planet. Marcus asks if he can come in. Sarah hesitates, then nods and opens the door wider. She asks the children to go to their room for a moment. Emma complains but obeys, taking Daniel by the hand. When the bedroom door closes, Sarah crosses her arms and waits. She doesn't offer a seat, doesn't offer coffee, doesn't make anything comfortable for him. She has no obligation to do so. Marcus begins to speak, and for the first time in decades his words come out without prior rehearsal, without calculated strategy, just raw and uncomfortable truth. He says he was wrong, completely wrong, about everything. Says the company is collapsing exactly as she predicted and that he finally understands the extent of his own arrogant blindness. Says she's extraordinarily talented and that he was incapable of seeing that because he's trapped in a completely flawed value system. But then he stops the apologies and goes deeper. He tells about his childhood with a violent father, about building an emotional fortress that became a prison. Tells about the ex-wife who left because he was incapable of being a real human. About children who don't know him because he never let them. About decades chasing power to fill a void that only grew with each conquest. He talks about sitting on the curb of his ruined childhood home realizing he himself is a ruin, imposing facade with dead interior. He says she was right about everything she said in the hallway that night. That he's the poorest man she's ever met because he has nothing real, nothing that matters, nothing that would survive if the money disappeared. He says he realizes now he spent his whole life on the wrong path, chasing the wrong things, destroying what really matters in pursuit of empty validation. Sarah listens to everything in silence. When he finishes, she waits a few more seconds before speaking. Her voice is firm but not cruel, just honest in a way that hurts more than any anger. She says she appreciates the vulnerability, that she recognizes it must have cost a lot for a man like him to admit these things. But she also says words are easy, that everyone talks beautifully when losing everything, that true transformation isn't a dramatic moment of enlightenment, it's daily work of real change. She says she's heard powerful men make emotional confessions before, always when facing consequences, always when they need something. She says she's not impressed by his epiphany because epiphanies disappear when pressure eases. She asks what he'll do when the crisis passes, when he has power back, when he doesn't need her anymore. If he'll return to the same patterns because they're comfortable, because they're all he knows. Marcus feels each word like a precise cut. She's right, of course. How many times over the years did he promise to change something, to do better, to be different, only to revert when things stabilized? But this time feels different. This time the pain is so deep, the revelation so devastating, that he can't imagine returning to who he was. But he also understands that saying this would only confirm her skepticism. Words mean nothing at this moment. Only future actions can prove anything. Sarah continues, saying she always knew she was talented, always knew her worth, but spent years in a system that insisted she was worthless. Says being invisible destroys a person gradually, makes you question your own sanity, makes you doubt what you know to be true. She says Marcus and men like him don't do this intentionally, which makes it even worse, because they don't even notice when they're crushing people, it's just the normal way of operating in the world. She says she's not angry at him, she's tired of him, of the system he represents, of the constant struggle to be seen as a complete human being. Says his apologies don't change years of invisibility, don't pay back rents she struggled to cover, don't recover moments with her children she sacrificed trying to prove her worth to a company that never cared. Marcus listens and doesn't try to defend himself because there's no defense. Then he does something he's never done in a professional context. He humbly asks what she needs, not as a transaction, but as recognition of real debt. He says the company will collapse without her help, but that he's not here to manipulate or pressure her. He's here because she deserved respect from the beginning and he fundamentally failed to give that. Sarah looks at him for a long time, studying his face to see if manipulation is hidden beneath humility. But she sees only a genuinely broken man, perhaps for the first time seeing another human being as an equal instead of a piece on a board. She doesn't decide anything at that moment. She just says she'll think about it, that she needs to consider not just the company but her own dignity, that doing the right thing sometimes means letting corrupt structures fall. Marcus thanks her and leaves knowing he gave back to her something he should never have taken, the power of choice over her own life. 3 days later, Marcus sends a message asking to meet Sarah at a neutral cafe, a public place where she'll feel safe, not in corporate territory where power imbalance is architectural. She agrees and they meet at a small coffee shop in her neighborhood, a place with worn formica tables and a handwritten menu on a blackboard. Marcus arrives first, orders simple coffee and waits nervously in a way he hasn't experienced since a job interview 30 years ago. When Sarah enters, he automatically stands, a gesture of respect his subordinates always do for him but which he rarely does for others. She sits and goes straight to the point, asking what he wants. Marcus takes a deep breath and presents a carefully prepared proposal. He offers the position of Chief Technology Officer with a salary of $500,000 a year, significant equity participation, a team of 15 engineers under her command, unlimited budget for projects, private office on the executive floor. He also offers a signing bonus of $200,000 immediately, premium health plan covering everything for her and her children, housing allowance allowing her to move to a much better apartment. It's a proposal that would make any professional accept without hesitation. Sarah listens to everything without interrupting. When he finishes, she takes the coffee cup, sips, and says one word, no. Marcus is paralyzed. He expected negotiation, expected her to ask for more, expected a counteroffer, but didn't expect simple and direct refusal. He asks why, which part of the offer isn't satisfactory, how much she needs to accept. Sarah puts the cup on the table and looks directly into his eyes. She explains with tired patience, like a teacher teaching a concept for the 10th time to a student who refuses to understand. Says the problem isn't money, it's fundamental principle. Says he's still thinking he can buy a solution to a problem that isn't transactional, that he's trying to apply business logic to a question of human dignity. She says accepting this offer now, under these conditions, would validate exactly the system that destroyed her. Would confirm she only matters when he needs her, that her value is contingent on his crisis, that recognition comes only when serving him benefits him. Would be selling her soul for material comfort, and she's lived poor long enough to know that financial poverty is more bearable than spiritual poverty. Sarah explains that if she returns now, she'll always be the woman he fired and then rescued when he needed her. She'll be a story of his redemption, not genuine recognition of her. She'll be a tool in his narrative, not the protagonist in her own. And after years of being invisible, she refuses to accept visibility only on his terms, only when it's convenient for him. She says something deeper then. That she doesn't want to work at a company where culture is so toxic that talent is only recognized during crisis. That she doesn't want to lead a team in an environment where respect is based on hierarchy and fear, not merit and collaboration. That she doesn't want to build a career on a rotten foundation, even if they pay her well to ignore the rot. Sarah says he's offering a lot of money but not offering what she really needs, real systemic transformation. Says he wants to fix the immediate problem, she wants to fix the structural problem. He wants her to save the company, she wants the company to become a place worth saving. And these are fundamentally different things. Marcus feels each word dismantle the logic he brought prepared. He thought he was being generous, humble, fair. But she's revealing he's still thinking transactionally, still trying to buy his way out of a moral dilemma with financial resources. He offered everything he values, money, power, status, and she's saying these things don't have the value he always believed they had. He asks then, voice genuinely lost, what she wants from him. Sarah responds she doesn't know if he's capable of giving what she really wants. Says she wants corporate culture where people like her are heard from the beginning, not just when everything's on fire. Wants an environment where single mothers aren't presumed incompetent. Wants a system where talent is recognized regardless of academic pedigree or social connections. Wants an organization that values humanity as much as it values profit. She says all this requires him to change fundamentally, not just superficial behavior but core values. Requires him to rebuild the entire company from the inside out, to give up absolute control, to trust people, to admit he doesn't know everything. And she doubts he's capable of that because people don't change that deeply, especially people who spent their whole lives building identity on exactly the opposite. Marcus feels the brutal truth of those words. Part of him wants to argue, defend himself, but a deeper part knows she's right to distrust. How can he promise transformation when he's barely begun to understand his own flaws? How can he ask her to trust when he spent years proving himself unworthy of trust? He has no good answer, so he simply admits she's right to refuse, that he doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, that he proved to be exactly who she describes. Sarah gets up to leave, but before she does she says one last thing. She says she doesn't wish him ill, doesn't want revenge, doesn't take pleasure in his suffering. Says she sees in him a man who's beginning to awaken to his own flaws, and that's painful but necessary. But she also says awakening isn't transformation, it's just the first step, and the road ahead is long, difficult, and he'll have to walk it alone until he proves to himself, not to her, that change is real. She says maybe one day, if he does the real work of becoming a better human, they can work together. But not today, not like this, not under the pretense of saving him from consequences he deserves to face. Then Sarah leaves the coffee shop, leaving Marcus sitting alone with cold coffee and a rejected proposal that represents everything he always believed had value, now revealed as completely insufficient before what really matters. 6 days after that meeting at the coffee shop, the system collapses exactly as Sarah predicted. It's Tuesday, 11:23 in the morning when the first failures begin. Screens go black in 3 departments simultaneously. Financial transactions stop processing. Corporate emails return errors. Within 15 minutes, the entire technological infrastructure is falling like carefully arranged dominoes. Marcus is in a meeting with the board of investors when he receives an emergency call. James is shouting on the phone saying everything's falling apart, that they tried to implement corrections and made the situation worse, that now even backup systems are compromised. Marcus abruptly hangs up the conference call and runs to the Technology Operations Center where 50 engineers are in total panic, typing frantically, trying to contain damage spreading like fire in a dry forest. The following hours are corporate apocalypse. Customer data is temporarily exposed, massive security breach. News spreads instantly, company stock plummets 17% in the first hour, 28% by market close. Major corporate clients start canceling contracts, invoking service violation clauses. Legal calls explode predicting class action lawsuits. Regulatory agencies announce investigations. Marcus watches everything from an improvised war room, surrounded by screens showing systems failing in real time, financial reports bleeding red, messages from furious clients flooding communication channels. He realizes with devastating clarity that Sarah described exactly this, predicted every detail, and he fired her for trying to prevent it. The irony is so brutal it seems like cosmic punishment for arrogance. The next day, the board of investors convenes an emergency meeting. 10 men and 2 women sitting around a long table, all looking at Marcus with expressions ranging from anger to disappointment to calculating fear. The board chairman, George Wellington, 72 years old billionaire with a reputation for destroying incompetent CEOs, begins brutal interrogation. George asks how Marcus allowed this to happen. Asks why warnings were ignored. Asks who will be held accountable. Marcus tries to explain about complex vulnerability, about technical challenges, but George interrupts saying he doesn't want technical excuses, wants to know why Marcus fired exactly the person who could have prevented all this. Sarah's story has already leaked, board members read articles, saw interviews, know the whole narrative. Marcus has no good defense. He says he made a decision based on incomplete information, that he didn't recognize her value, that he made an error in judgment. George leans forward and says something cutting. An error in judgment is choosing the wrong investment. What you did is fundamental incompetence disguised as leadership, it's arrogance so great it completely blinded you, and now it's costing billions for shareholders. Other board members join in. A woman, Sarah Chen, asks why the company culture is so toxic that talented employees are systematically ignored. Another board member, a young man from an investment fund, says Marcus is too old, too disconnected, too arrogant to lead in the modern world. One by one, they destroy the reputation Marcus spent decades building. And he sits there and absorbs it because it's all true. George finally gets to the main point. He says the board is considering removing Marcus as CEO, that loss of confidence is complete, that investors are demanding leadership change. Marcus feels the ground opening beneath him. The company is his identity, his whole life, everything he built. Losing this is losing himself. But then something strange happens. Marcus sits up straighter and says with a calm voice that maybe they're right. Says he's clearly failing fundamentally as a leader, that Sarah exposed flaws in judgment that go far beyond this incident, that maybe the company deserves better than he can currently offer. The silence in the room is absolute. No one expected admission, they expected defense, denial, political fight. George seems almost disappointed by the lack of resistance. He says they'll give Marcus 30 days to fix the situation or the board will vote for removal. Marcus thanks him coolly and leaves the meeting knowing he just saw a future where everything he built is taken from him, where he becomes a cautionary tale in business schools, where his name becomes synonymous with a leader who lost his way. In the following days, the crisis deepens. Company loses 62% of market value. Thousands of employees are laid off in emergency cost cuts. Strategic partners abandon contracts. The media has a field day reporting the fall of Marcus Holloway, arrogant king finally brought down by his own hubris. Economic commentators analyze how his toxic leadership created a culture that would inevitably lead to disaster. And through all this, Marcus thinks about Sarah Mitchell living in a small apartment with her children, watching news about the company collapsing, knowing she tried to prevent it. He imagines what she feels now, vindication mixed with sadness for all the affected lives, justified anger tempered by compassion that cruel people rarely deserve. He understands she would be perfectly justified in feeling satisfied with his fall, but suspects she's not the type of person who finds joy in others' suffering, even when deserved. Marcus is facing real loss for the first time in decades. Not abstract or delayed loss, but immediate and devastating consequences of choices he made. And as he watches the empire crumble, he realizes maybe Sarah did him a favor by refusing to save him. Maybe he needs to feel the full weight of consequences. Maybe real transformation only comes when there's no safety net, when you have to face the ruins of what you built and decide what kind of person you'll be amid the rubble. Marcus begins transformation not with a grand dramatic gesture, but with a small act of humility. The morning after the total collapse, he wakes at 6, skips his military exercise routine, and instead sits with an old notebook and starts writing. He lists all the people he remembers hurting over the years. The list grows to 3 pages. Executives he fired cruelly. Employees he publicly humiliated. Partners he cheated in negotiations. Family he neglected. For each name, he tries to remember specific details of what he did, not to punish himself masochistically, but to face the complete truth about his patterns. He starts with his ex-wife Margaret. He reaches out to her for the first time in 2 years, not by cold email but by call where he listens to her breathing for 5 seconds before finding words. He asks to speak in person. She hesitates, then agrees, curious about what could motivate his contact. They meet in a public park in London where she lives now. Margaret is 51, grey hair cut short, appearance of a woman who found peace after a long war. Marcus doesn't bring gifts, doesn't bring proposals, just uncomfortable honesty. He apologizes for years of emotional neglect, for treating marriage as an administrative obligation, for never being really present even when physically there. He admits he destroyed something beautiful because he was afraid of the vulnerability true love requires. Margaret listens with watery eyes, not from possibility of reconciliation but from finally received validation. She says she waited 17 years to hear him say these words, that it no longer matters for their future but matters for her healing. They talk for 3 hours, not as bitter ex-spouses but as two human beings trying to understand where everything derailed. Then he reaches out to his children. Thomas is 28, works with art in Berlin. Elena is 25, doing a master's in psychology in Boston. Neither wants to see him initially. He sends handwritten letters, not corporate emails. In these letters he doesn't ask for forgiveness because he knows he doesn't deserve it yet, just acknowledges specific failures as a father. Lists moments he missed, recitals, graduations, birthdays, important conversations, just because work seemed more urgent. Admits he provided everything materially but nothing emotionally, that he treated them like projects he financed instead of human beings who needed him. Thomas eventually responds, short email saying he appreciates the honesty but isn't ready for a relationship. Elena calls after 3 weeks, voice cautious, saying as a psychology student she recognizes patterns of parental narcissism and wants to know if his change is genuine or performance. Marcus admits he doesn't know yet, that he's at the beginning of a long journey, that only time will prove anything. Elena says that answer is more honest than anything he's ever said before, and schedules coffee for the following month. At work, Marcus starts changing culture daily. He institutes a policy where ideas from any employee, regardless of level, go through formal evaluation before being discarded. Creates mixed committees with representation from all departments for important decisions. He starts attending junior team meetings unannounced, sitting in the back just to listen, to understand problems that never reached him through hierarchy. He seeks out employees he fired or humiliated and offers direct apologies without expecting forgiveness. One former manager refuses to even talk to him. Another accepts the apology but says career damage was permanent. A woman he harshly criticized in a public meeting starts crying and says she developed severe anxiety after that she's still in therapy. Marcus listens to everything, absorbs each testimony of pain he caused, doesn't try to minimize or justify. Just acknowledges and asks if there's anything he can do to repair, knowing for many there's nothing. He starts therapy sessions 3 times a week with a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma and control patterns. The sessions are brutally uncomfortable. He confronts memories he buried for 40 years. Cries in a sterile office. Screams at a father dead for 2 decades. Recognizes he built an empire as revenge against the boy who was beaten and humiliated, that each conquest was an attempt to prove worth to a ghost who never cared. Marcus also starts volunteer work on Saturdays at a community center in the poor neighborhood where Sarah lives. Not as a magnanimous investor donating money, but as a person serving food in a community kitchen, helping children with homework, cleaning bathrooms. It's humble work no one photographs, that doesn't become a newspaper article. Just real work helping real people without an audience to impress. At this center he meets Lisa, single mother of 3 children working 2 jobs. Meets Jorge, undocumented immigrant washing dishes 16 hours a day to send money to family in Mexico. Meets Tanya, brilliant teenager without money for college despite perfect grades. He sees Sarah multiplied in dozens of faces, extraordinary people made invisible by social structures he always accepted as natural. He begins to understand that poverty isn't individual moral failure but systemic failure he helped perpetuate. The transformation isn't linear or easy. There are days when Marcus reverts to old patterns, when he explodes in a meeting, when he wants to control everything again. But now there's a difference, he notices when he does this. He stops, breathes, apologizes, tries again. His employees watch with initial skepticism, expecting change to be temporary. But weeks turn into months, and behavior remains consistent. He promotes a young woman, daughter of immigrants, to a leadership position based on her work, not on connections. He implements a hiring program that removes names and universities from resumes to reduce bias. He changes parental leave policy, allowing fathers and mothers to have real time with children. He reduces his own salary by 40% and distributes the difference as bonuses to low-level employees. These are concrete changes, not just nice words in a corporate memo. Marcus also starts writing an article for a business magazine about his failures. Not a polished public relations piece, but an honest confession about how arrogance and toxic culture almost destroyed the company. He writes about Sarah Mitchell specifically, publicly acknowledges error in judgment, admits corporate systems systematically devalue certain types of talent. The PR team begs him not to publish, saying it will make the situation worse. He publishes anyway because truth matters more than image. The article goes viral, not the way he expected. Half the readers praise him for rare honesty. The other half criticizes him, saying it's calculated performance to recover reputation. Marcus reads both types of comments and realizes he can't control how they interpret, can only control if change is real. He chooses to focus on daily work of being better, not on public perception of that work. 3 months after the initial collapse, Marcus is in a precarious situation. Company lost half its value, is struggling to survive. The board still considers removing him. He works 18 hours a day trying to stabilize the situation, but now he works differently. He listens more. Delegates real authority. Admits when he doesn't know something. Asks for help. Builds a team based on competence and character, not politics and pedigree. He also continues reaching out to Sarah periodically, not to pressure her but to update her on changes he's making, to ask advice on how to improve culture. She responds cautiously, offers specific suggestions, observes from afar to see if changes are sustained. She's not ready to trust completely, but recognizes his effort seems genuine in ways it wasn't before. One night, Marcus is again at the community center when Sarah appears. She comes to pick up clothing donations for her children. They see each other across the hall, both surprised. She walks up to him, observes him serving soup to homeless people, really talking with them, not just playing a role. They don't speak at that moment, just exchange a look that acknowledges something changed, not completely, not permanently perhaps, but substantively. Marcus understands that real transformation has no finish line, no dramatic moment of complete redemption. It's just daily work of choosing differently, of confronting ingrained instincts, of rebuilding character brick by brick. Some days are better than others. Some days he fails miserably. But he keeps trying because for the first time in decades he has purpose that isn't just accumulation of power. He's trying to become human again, a task more difficult than building a billion-dollar empire ever was. 4.5 months after the original firing, Sarah receives an unexpected email from Marcus's assistant. It's not a job offer or business proposal. It's an invitation to visit the company and see the implemented changes, no pressure, no expectation, just an invitation to witness what she helped catalyze. Sarah hesitates for 3 days before accepting, curious despite herself. She arrives on a Saturday when the office is nearly empty. Marcus waits for her in the lobby, not on the executive floor. He wears jeans and a simple sweater, not a $12,000 suit. His appearance changed in subtle but significant ways. Less tense in the shoulders, more lines around the eyes from real emotion, a presence that seems more human and less intimidating. They walk through the company while Marcus explains changes. The technology department has new leadership, diverse team with women and people of various backgrounds in important positions. He shows a mentoring program where senior executives work with junior employees not to control them but to develop talents. He presents a new communication protocol where ideas from any level are formally evaluated by a mixed committee. Sarah listens, observes, asks difficult technical questions. Marcus responds honestly, sometimes saying he doesn't know but will find out. When she asks about the company's finances, he admits the situation is still critical, that they may not survive, that his time as CEO is probably ending regardless of changes. He says this without self-pity, just as a fact he accepts. Then Marcus takes her to a private conference room and shows a specific project. He created a fund using $20 million of his own, personal money not corporate, dedicated to scholarships for talented students without financial resources or social connections. The fund has a name Sarah immediately recognizes, the Patricia and Robert Mitchell Fund, the names of her parents. Marcus says he researched her history, discovered about the parents who supported her unconditionally, that he wants to honor their memory by helping young talents like she was. Sarah feels emotion squeezing her throat. He didn't ask permission, didn't use this as a manipulation tool, simply did it because it was right. The fund has already awarded 15 full scholarships. Marcus shows the portfolio of beneficiaries: daughter of a janitor who wants to study engineering, son of an agricultural worker interested in medicine, young mother who dropped out of school but has talent for programming. All invisible in the way Sarah was invisible. But Sarah still has fundamental doubt. She asks directly, what happens when the crisis passes, when you recover power, when you don't need to prove anything anymore? Marcus sits in silence for a long time before responding. He says honestly he doesn't know if change will last forever, that he recognizes humans revert to old patterns under pressure, that he could still fail spectacularly. But he says something fundamental changed in him that seems permanent. Now he sees people as people, not as resources, and he can't unsee that anymore. He tells about weekly therapy where he works on childhood traumas. About gradual and difficult relationships with children who are slowly starting to trust him again. About volunteer work at the community center he does every Saturday, not because it improves his image but because it connects him with real humanity. He says transformation wasn't a dramatic moment of enlightenment, it was 1,000 small daily choices to be different, and it's still work in progress. Sarah watches him speak and sees something she didn't see before, genuine humility born of real brokenness. It's not performance, it's not calculated manipulation. It's a man who confronted his own emptiness and is trying to fill it with real substance, not hollow achievements. She still has caution, still has scars from years of being invisible, but recognizes his change, imperfect and incomplete as it is, seems authentic. Then she asks something he doesn't expect. She asks if he's open to her proposal, not about a job but about structure. Sarah says she's thought a lot about how companies could function differently, about systems that value real contribution over corporate politics, about environments where people like her aren't systematically marginalized. She says she has ideas about organizational restructuring that could make the company not just survive but become a model of how businesses can operate ethically. Marcus feels hope for the first time in months. He says he'd love to hear her ideas, not as a boss hiring a subordinate but as a partner seeking wisdom. Sarah opens her laptop and presents a detailed analysis of the company's structural failures, not just technological but organizational, cultural, philosophical. She demonstrates how rigid hierarchy suffocates innovation, how lack of diversity creates systematic blind spots, how culture of fear destroys creativity. She proposes radical restructuring, distributed leadership structure where decisions are made by teams with real expertise, not distant executives. Evaluation system based on measurable contribution, not politics. Culture that treats failure as learning opportunity, not reason for punishment. Compensation that reduces absurd disparity between top and bottom of organization. Marcus listens fascinated. Some proposals directly threaten him, dismantle power structures he built. Old instinct wants to resist, wants to defend control. But he breathes, observes this reaction, and chooses differently. He asks how to implement these changes, who they'd need to involve, what resources would be necessary. Sarah says implementation requires his total commitment, that cultural changes don't work when leadership only pretends to support. Requires him to really give up control, to trust people, to accept the company can function better without him at the absolute center of everything. She asks if he can do that. Marcus takes a deep breath and says he doesn't know, but wants to try, because the alternative is returning to patterns that almost destroyed everything that matters. Then Sarah makes a concrete proposal. She accepts returning, not as an employee or even as an executive, but as an independent consultant and strategic partner. She'll work to implement structural reforms, but maintains complete autonomy, equal voice in decisions, and the right to leave if changes are only cosmetic. She won't do this for a giant salary, though compensation needs to be fair. She'll do it because she believes the company can become a model of how businesses can operate with humanity and profit not being mutually exclusive. Marcus feels profound gratitude he can't fully articulate. He offers his hand to shake, old gesture of closing a deal. But Sarah ignores the hand and opens her arms for a brief hug. It's a human gesture that acknowledges this isn't a commercial transaction, it's two human beings trying to fix a broken system, each carrying their own wounds but committed to a shared vision of something better. When they separate, Marcus says one final thing. He thanks her not just for returning but for never giving up believing transformation was possible, even when he gave every reason not to believe. Sarah responds that all people deserve a chance to evolve, that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to do the real work, that she's seen firsthand how poverty and trauma and pain can shape people into destructive forms, but also seen how conscious choice can reshape those forms into something better. She says she believes in him, cautiously but genuinely, and that belief is a gift he needs to honor every day.